Whoa, this is the Illusion reporting from somewhere on Spaceship Earth. It's time for a book review. Okay, this is Destiny of the Republic by Candice Milard. Takes place in the late 1800s. It's about our 20th president, President Garfield. Didn't know anything about President Garfield before I read this novel. By the way, it is totally, it totally comes with like 80 pages of notes, backing everything up. It comes from President Garfield's presidential library. By the way, he was the first president to have a presidential library. Interesting thing about President Garfield, he didn't even try to be president. He just kind of got shanghaied into it, and everybody loved him. He was the first popular president after the Civil War, which was pretty interesting. And 5 months into his presidential term, a lunatic went and shot him, and the doctors at that time killed him. And whoa, so you're like, whoa, someone shot him and the doctors killed him. What's interesting is the doctors in 1880 were not listening to a doctor named Lister, who had come up with antiseptic. He was the first doctor to realize that people were getting sick from gangrene and all sorts of parasites and germs because they were not using sterile equipment, and they were sticking their dirty fingers in wounds. And you read it, it's all about, like, there's a whole thing about like medicine at the time of President Garfield's assassination attempt. And you realize that this doctor was a Dr. Sillis, who was the doctor who was a full arrogant SOB who was trying to make his like big career moment after being President Garfield's doctor, and he was a total botch because he didn't want to listen to like the new theory in medicine at the time, which was about germs. A lot of doctors didn't believe in germs yet, and about sterilizing their equipment. So this is the whole part of this book is about how President Garfield received a bullet wound, but the bullet basically was lodged in a super safe place, and that the doctors sticking their dirty fingers in non-sterilized equipment made this hole, because they didn't know where the bullets were. They didn't have x-rays, and they made this giant hole in his back, and they were sticking their dirty fingers in there, and basically the dude died of like blood poisoning from like septic shock or something like that, and died of infection, man. And he would have lived under normal circumstances, but because he was the president, this ego-driven guy was like, I'm gonna save the president. His quote was, if I can't save the president, nobody else can. And he was a total arrogant SOB, and he wouldn't let any of the other doctors in at the time who were like, hey man, this isn't the way to do it. So you read about that part of it, and at the same time, this is it's so interesting, is the telephone is just coming into service. Like Alexander Graham Bell is kind of rolling around at the same time, and he's in there trying to locate the bullet in President Garfield. And so there's telephones at the time, right? Which is interesting, because I thought the telephones came much later. But in 1880, there's telephones. And the hot part about it is, up until that time, the American people viewed the president was supposed to be super accessible. So he had no private security, no gates. You could walk right up to the White House and knock on the door and be like, I want to see the president, man. And all this kind of stuff, which I thought was pretty interesting on that level. And what you find out about President Garfield, that I'm like, kind of like just in awe of the guy. He came from poverty out in the Ohio frontier. He grew up in a log cabin. His father died when he was young. And he educated his mind, right? He educated his mind, and he became one of the smartest dudes in the country. And what was really interesting is why he got elected president was because he was giving the nomination speech at the Republican convention. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, the Democratic Party is the slave party. The Democratic Party was the people who were pro-slavery and the South. By the way, in case you're confused about who the Democratic Party is, they're the evil people, and they've always been the evil people. And I'm not pro-Republican, pro-Democrat. It's just read your history and you find out that the Democratic Party comes from a history of being slave owners. Factoid. And so President Garfield was a Republican and an abolitionist. And you know what? And I'm kind of digressing here is, everyone talks about the history of American slavery and, they had slave owners. You know what everyone forgets to mention is there were more people that were abolitionists and anti-slavery than there were slave people. Hence, we were able to use the system of government that our founding fathers created to remove slavery from our national consciousness. So when I hear a lot of talk about like, oh, we're a history, yeah, with slavery, definitely part of our history. But you know what everyone forgets? Is people that were anti-slavery were the majority at a certain point and persevered over the slave-owning mentality and basically realized that all men were created equal. So when I hear all this nonsense about like slavery and reparations, I go, yeah, there's a certain aspect of our culture, but the truth of the matter is if it wasn't for a bunch of anti-slavery white people, there would still be slavery here, because slavery is not specific to any color of your skin, dude. There's slavery has been going on and still going on all over the world. I digress, but I thought that was an interesting thing, because Garfield was a huge anti-slavery kind of guy. And he was all about unifying the country. So when he came into power, and the weird thing was, back to where I digressed, is he was giving a nominating speech for another presidential candidate, and all the other presidential candidates at the time were such jackasses that everyone was just like, we want Garfield. He's a cool guy. And Garfield was a cool guy. Like when I read about him, he is like now kind of like my new favorite president. And the bummer was he only got to do his deal 5 months. But the guy which was really interesting, is the vice president at the time, Chester Arthur, is a total scumbag who gets appointed as vice president due to political favors at the time. And when Garfield gets shot, Chester Arthur has like a spiritual awakening and actually becomes a really good president. He transforms himself because he's so bummed that Garfield got smoked. So he's like, because everyone kind of blames him and his buddy, this Conkling guy, for like setting up the vibe where Garfield got assassinated, because the guy who attempts to assassinate this crazy guy is like, I did it for you. I did it for you guys. And so this Chester Arthur, the 21st president, has like a big spiritual awakening and changes his character, which I think is what a man's supposed to do. And so this is a really, really valuable book, I think. Destiny of the Republic. I think it just shows that somewhere our presidents have gone off the rails, and that Garfield probably would have, oh man, what a different country it would have been. So I'm going to give it a full required reading for you out there who are interested in American history, because this book changed my mind, changed my perception, changed my understanding of the country I live in. Candice Milard, Destiny of the Republic. I'm giving it a 2 thumbs up, man. It's a good read, just on the straight way it's laid out, the narrative format. It's a really good read. You get into the fact that the guy who killed him was one of the first guys to do the I'm crazy defense, right? So you get a lot of interesting stuff's going on in the late 1800s, man. And this gives you a feel for that, and it gets you in there, and you learn a lot, and you find out about one of the unsung heroes of American history, President Garfield. All right, it's The Illusion. I'm out.